oral questions, questions orales. L'honorable chef de l'opposition.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
On a entendu.
Yesterday, we heard the recording of a phone call. It revealed that the RCMP Commissioner was experiencing political pressure, not only from the Minister of Emergency Preparedness, but the Prime Minister himself. When it came to the inquiry in the largest mass shooting in Canada's history, 22 people were killed. It also contradicts statements made in the House from the Minister of Emergency Preparedness. Will he resign?
L'honorable secrétaire parlementaire.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Madam Speaker, please allow me to express again our most sincere condolences.
Acte de violence insolable.
It was an odious act of violence.
Dans mes pensées.
I am keeping all of the victims in mind. A clear principle of our democracy is that our government respects the law and did not interfere in a police investigation.
Of the opposition.
Well, the Minister of Emergency Preparedness said, quote, "At no point did our government pressure or interfere with the operational decisions of the RCMP, including their communication strategy." Yet, only 10 days after the biggest mass shooting in Canadian history, the Commissioner of the RCMP was recorded saying, "It was a request that I got from the Minister's office." Ooh. Furthermore, she said she was waiting for a call from the Prime Minister so that she could apologize for not having released the information that the politicians wanted out. They wanted this information out so that they could advance their partisan agenda. Will they resign?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam President, the member opposite knows really well that one of the most fundamental principles of our democracy is that politicians do not interfere in police investigations or police operations. Let me be absolutely clear. We believe that that is a sacrosanct principle of our democracy, and at no moment ever our government has ever interfered in police investigation or police operation, nor we will ever do so. Thank you.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
And yet a recording from the Commissioner of the RCMP shows that that is exactly what they did. It was, quote, "It was a request that I got from the Minister's office." And I shared with the Minister that it was in fact going to be in the release, and it wasn't. I'm now sitting on a request in my phone that the Minister wants to speak with me. She says further, "I'm waiting for a call from the Prime Minister so that I can apologize." Wow. Apologize for not releasing sensitive investigative information to advance the Liberal Party's partisan agenda. With this revelation of falsehoods stated by this Minister in this House, will he resign?
Here, here. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, let me repeat once again, at no point did our government attempt to direct or otherwise interfere with police operations. Let me quote what Commissioner herself stated to testimony to parliamentarians, and I quote, "Let me be clear. I did not interfere in the investigation. I did not receive direction, and I was not influenced by government officials regarding the public release of information, and more importantly, on the direction of the investigation. I ensured that operational independence was maintained in all my interactions with government as I do today." This is a direct quote from the
L'Honorable Chef de l'Opposition.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Another quote in a recorded conversation. So she too has stated one thing here and the opposite there. Similarly, with the ArriveCan $54 million scandal, we see the government saying things that contradict the facts. They released a document to the House of Commons saying that Think On Inc. had received a $1.2 million contract for experimentation of mobile QR scanning. Yet the CEO said yesterday he never got any money. In fact, they don't even work in the field. So if his company didn't get the money, who did?
The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House.
Matters. Obviously, the government ensures that contracts are handed to the highest standards. There are questions about this contract that are being looked at. Certainly, we want to make sure there are answers. But I will say, Madam Speaker, that what we did when the country was in a situation of crisis, when the opposition was calling for the border to be closed, is ensure that we brought forward an app that allowed the movement of people safely during that crisis. And that is something that worked and was extremely effective, Madam Speaker.
Hear, hear.
L'honorable chef de l'opposition.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Making somebody rich. We just don't yet know who. So the government released a document in the House of Commons saying that Think On Inc. got $1.2 million in ArriveCan contracts. Yesterday, the CEO said, we have received no money from the CBSA. He further said, we're not even remotely in that space. In other words, they don't even do the work that was paid for. So this company did not get the $1.2 million. Two questions. Who did get the money, and where is it now?
The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House.
Madam Speaker, CBSA is looking into this matter. They're aware of concerns with respect to the contract. I can assure the honourable member opposite that in all matters with respect to contracts that we adhere to the absolute highest standards and demand those standards in every interaction that the government interacts in. But again, I will point out, Madam Speaker, the imperative nature of the action that the ArriveCan app was able to facilitate. We were in a situation where the opposition was calling for the border to be closed. We wanted to make sure that Canadians could travel safely. We introduced an app that facilitated that in a time of crisis and made sure that Canadians could travel.
Honorable député de Saint-Jean.
Madame la Présidente, Radio-Canada révèle...
Madam Speaker, Radio Canada revealed that the federal government launched a witch hunt for journalistic sources in order to punish a whistleblower. They want to find out who revealed that the federal government was appointing a unilingual Anglophone as CEO of the Museum of Canadian History. The government could have looked in the mirror and asked why it was still making unilingual Anglophone appointments, but no. Instead, they combed through emails and called 82 employees to find out who talked. How is it that the government is not bothered about making a unilingual Anglophone appointment, but that the public knows about it? The Honourable Minister. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague for her question. I will have her note that the president of the Federation of Journalists in Quebec declared during that interview that public officials can't use their work tools to disseminate confidential information. Obviously, we're working to move the French fact forward. I have worked in the past to make sure that culture is supported throughout Canada, especially in Quebec. The Honourable Member for Saint-Jean. Madam Speaker, the Federation of Professional Journalists for Quebec is worried that Ottawa is dissuading whistleblowers when they should be protected. Canada has the worst whistleblower law in the world, according to the International Bar Association. It's 50th out of 50. That's why the Bloc Québécois introduced Bill C-90 to better protect public servants who come forward. Will the government support it instead of going on a whistleblower hunt, even a witch hunt, directed at its own employees? The Honourable Minister. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Canada is one of the most transparent countries on the planet. You have only to look at the reports by Transparency International. We are one of the countries that makes the most room for journalists. We have very important processes when it comes to divulging information. We're proud of that, and we will continue to work to continue to be one of the best in the world. Thank you.
New Westminster.
The Honourable Member for New Westminster Burnaby. The lack of leadership of this Liberal government in health is putting the lives of children at risk. A disaster. That's what's happening in the emergency room at Saint-Justine Hospital in Montreal. Due to a lack of space, children have to wait in the corridors all alone before being treated. Health workers are overwhelmed. The quality of care is deteriorating, according to doctors. The Liberal government must act. It is urgent. When will the Liberals show leadership and finally invest the necessary funds in health to save lives now? The Honourable Minister of Health. Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I am very pleased to receive this question, and I thank the member for asking it. Our health workers are indeed experiencing a crisis throughout the entire country. They are tired. Many of them have left the profession. Many of them are ill. Many of them are thinking about leaving in the next months or years. This is a crisis that we have to admit exists. We have to treat it. We have to work with provinces and territories to do it. And that's why over the last several months, we have engaged in significant talks to do so. We will have more talks in the future, and we will work with all of our colleagues, including ministers of health throughout the country.
They need to start funding health care now. Madam Speaker, Nova Scotians lost loved ones, and an entire community was devastated by a mass shooting. People deserve honest answers from this government. Yesterday, in recordings released by the Commission, it's clear that the former Minister of Public Safety and the RCMP Commissioner's stories don't add up. If the Liberal government interfered with an investigation into the worst mass shooting in Canadian history for their own political gain, Canadians need to know. So who is telling the truth, the Minister or the RCMP Commissioner?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And I want to remind the member opposite again, and I'm sure he's aware of this most important principle in our democracy, which is that politicians do not interfere in police operations. They do not interfere in police investigations. That's a sacrosanct principle, Madam Speaker, that our government will always live by. At no point ever the minister or the government interfered in a matter of police operation or investigation, nor it will ever do so. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Kildonan St. Paul.
Madam Speaker, the newly released audio recordings of the RCMP Commissioner confirms that the Minister pressured the Commissioner to release sensitive information about the ongoing investigation into the worst mass killing in our history. Wow. By requesting this information be released to further the Liberal political agenda, the Minister politically interfered in the RCMP investigation, and he misled a parliamentary committee about it. For this, the Minister must resign. Will he resign today?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, I will restate this really important principle because I think it's worth repeating, that in our democratic part of the system, politicians do not interfere in police operations or police investigations. At no point did our government instruct anyone to release any information, because we would never violate the sacrosanct principle of interfering in a police investigation or police operation, as was the case in this circumstance.
The Honourable Member for Kildonan St. Paul.
The former Minister of Public Safety misled a parliamentary committee on the record, Madam Speaker. He said he was not aware the Commissioner would release sensitive information, and he said he never asked her to reveal that information, but both claims are now proven to be completely misleading with the new audio recording. Worse yet, the Minister knew the release of this information would jeopardize the investigation into the worst mass killing in Canadian history, and this was all for Liberal political gain, Madam Speaker. He must resign today. Will he resign?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, at no point did our government attempt to direct or otherwise interfere the police operations that was taking place in that tragic incident that took place in Nova Scotia. And let me re-quote what the Commissioner said in a parliamentary committee on July 25th of this year. She stated, Speaker, let me be clear, I did not interfere in the investigation, I did not receive direction, and I was not influenced by government officials regarding the public release of information, and more importantly, on the direction of the investigation. I ensured that operational independence...
The Honourable Member for Thornhill.
Commissioner Lucky told the Nova Scotia RCMP that she wanted the details of the makes and the models of the weapons used in Canada's most deadly mass shooting released. Why? Because the minister pressured her to do so. We know they spoke about it. He knew it would jeopardize the investigation, but the minister had legislation coming, and this was part of a communications exercise for him. It was not about the investigation, the victims, or public safety. He played politics with a mass shooting investigation. What time today will he resign?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, the independence of police operations is a key principle in our democracy and one that our government deeply respects. At no time did our government attempt to interfere in police operations. That has never taken place. It's a sacrosanct principle of our democracy, and we'll always will live by it.
The Honourable Member for Thornhill.
Madam Speaker, in an accountable of an RCMP commissioner working with a minister to cover up the politicization of the biggest mass killing in Canadian history would result in immediate resignation. Not only did the minister mislead the House about knowing what we've all heard on tape, the minister was advised that releasing this information would jeopardize the investigation, and he asked for it to be done anyway. He put politics above the safety of Canadians and then covered it up. So what time today will he resign?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Speaker, what happened in Nova Scotia by way of that mass shooting is an absolute tragedy. Innocent people lost their lives. Our focus has been to ensure that through this inquiry,
Can we listen to the answers the same way we listen to the questions, please? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Our focus, Madam Speaker, has been through the inquiry to make sure that we learn the lessons from how to prevent such mass shootings ever to take place in any part of Canada. That investigation was led by the RCMP. The government did not interfere in that investigation, but because that is a fundamental principle of our democracy, politicians do not interfere with police operations.
Honorable député de Louis-Saint-Laurent.
Madame la Présidente, cette affaire est...
Madam Speaker, this is very serious. During this tragedy in Halifax, the government claims it never interfered in the process, and it's completely false. Yesterday, a recording was made public about a meeting that happened a few days after that situation where we clearly see that the government interfered. When the commissioner said, I flagged it because it was a request from the minister's office, and I told the minister that the information would be released, and then it wasn't. It was a request. I told the minister. When will the minister resign? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Madam Speaker, the independence of police operations is part of our democracy. Our government has deep respect for this. At no point did our government try to interfere in the investigation. The Honourable Member for Louis-Saint-Laurent. I will repeat. We got this information publicly yesterday. I flag it because it was a request I got from the minister's office, and I told the minister the information would be released, and then it wasn't. I told the minister. What did we find out? That the commissioner at the RCMP was waiting for the Prime Minister's call for what? To apologize. It has no place at all in a self-respecting democracy. When will the minister resign? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
The member in our democracy, politicians do not interfere in police operations or police investigations, as has been the case in this matter. We did not interfere in a police operation or police investigation. That has been confirmed by the commissioner herself when she testified before a parliamentary committee in July of this year, where she clearly said that she was not asked to direct the investigation, nor she was, and she worked hard to maintain the independence of that investigation.
L'honorable député de Joliette.
Madame la Présidente, l'occupation de camions...
Madam Speaker, the truckers' occupation of Ottawa dragged on because the federal government blocked any opportunity to intervene for 3 weeks. We knew that when the City of Ottawa asked for 1,800 police officers as reinforcements, the federal government did not respond. And then we also learned that the Mayor of Ottawa, Jim Wattens, asked the federal government several times to organize mediation. That was also refused. So for 3 weeks, no police reinforcements, no mediation, no progress. Why did the federal government block any possibility of intervention for 3 weeks while the population was held hostage? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, I can tell you that the federal government was engaged in ensuring that we end the illegal occupation of Ottawa and the illegal closure of our borders as well. And we worked very closely with local police authorities, which were responsible to provide policing here in case of Ottawa, for instance, and by providing resources as they were needed. In the end of the day, we needed to invoke the Emergencies Act because things were not getting done, and the result is that the occupation did come to an end.
Honorable député de Joliette.
The honourable member for Joliette.
Pas du tout. Gérer
No, not at all. Managing a crisis is a matter of hours or days, not 3 weeks. After 3 weeks of inaction, it was not the emergency measures that lifted the siege of Ottawa, it was the police. It was the 1,800 reinforcements, even 1,900 reinforcements that the City of Ottawa had been asking for the whole time. The second Ottawa got its reinforcements, an operation was launched, and not even 48 hours later, the streets of Ottawa were empty. It was the police who freed Ottawa from the siege. Why for 3 weeks did the federal government not ensure that the police were mobilized and coordinated? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, I can tell you from first-hand experience, being the local member of Parliament for the area, that the occupation of downtown Ottawa was extremely distressing for the residents who live in the downtown core and for many businesses. The federal government worked extremely closely with the municipal government and the provincial counterparts in making sure that all the resources that were needed were provided for so that we can end that occupation as quickly as possible. We all wish that occupation would have not lasted for three weeks, and that's why we had to invoke the Emergencies Act to put an end to the occupation and to ensure that our borders are not blockaded.
Excellent.
The honourable member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, Rideau Lakes.
Yesterday, the Globe and Mail revealed that the Liberals are claiming millions in payments to vendors for their ArriveCan boondoggle that never actually happened. A $54 million app with millions unaccounted for. Canadians are left wondering if there are more fake ArriveCan payments listed. First, it was Think On Inc. Then later in the day, Ernst & Young came forward to say this government is claiming false billing. So, does the minister, do these Liberals want to revise the figures that they signed off on?
The honourable leader of the government in the House.
Madam Speaker, I answered this earlier. I'm happy to again. The CBSA is taking a look at the contract. They're aware that there are questions. The Government of Canada and this government in all contracts conducts itself to the highest standard and demands the highest standards in every contract that it enters into. But with respect to the ArriveCan app, I would point out that the members opposite wanted to close the border, didn't support the app, and frankly were not helpful during that period of time and constantly changing their positions. We ensured that people were able to enter the country and that goods and services were able to flow in a time of crisis. Madam Speaker, will continue to be there for Canadians.
The honourable member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, Rideau Lakes.
What Canadians don't find helpful is that these Liberals have no intention of telling the truth. So here are some facts for them. They said the app would cost $80,000. It ended up costing $54 million. Then CBSA and these Liberals, these ministers, signed off on payments, saying that companies like Think On and companies like Ernst & Young receive payments from the government. These companies never received a dime. So money is missing. We have two questions for these Liberals. Who's lying and who got rich?
The honourable leader of the government in the House.
Madam Speaker, here are the facts. During an unprecedented time when the country was being rocked by COVID, and we needed to be able to make sure that people, and they're saying it doesn't matter, it absolutely does matter, that people were able to cross the border, that we were able on an urgent basis to create a system that kept them safe and ensured that they were able to continue to have mobility. In every step of the pandemic, whether or not it's in supports or whether or not it's in mobility, we were there for Canadians. As crises occur, our government will respond and will always do so to the highest standard.
L'honorable député de Portneuf-Jacques-Cartier.
Madame la Présidente, agir urgemment.
Madam Speaker, acting urgently doesn't mean recklessly spending taxpayers' money. This government has gotten us used to doubting its integrity. After the ventilators of a former Liberal MP and the land at Roxham Road, it's the ArriveCan app which cost $54 million. Experts say they could have done it for $250,000. We're being laughed at. Even worse, the government gave $1.2 million to a business which says it did not receive any money. A simple question: who did this government give the $1.2 million to? The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House. As I've already explained, the agency responsible for the contract understands full well that there are questions. In every situation, we will make sure that the government acts responsibly. We will answer questions and offer the oversight our system requires.
Honorable député de Lévis,
The Honourable Member for Lévis-Lobinière.
La Présidente, l'application
Madam Speaker, ArriveCan cost a fortune to Canadians, and it certainly does not work on the level of a $50 million that it cost. A good programmer could easily have done it for less than $250,000. Liberal incompetence cost $50 million again. Why is this Liberal government accumulating scandal after scandal? The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House.
Madame la Présidente, le député dans l'autre côté.
Madam Speaker, the member on the other side asked a question in an interesting way, and I will answer directly. That this situation was extremely difficult for our country. And it's not just a matter of the cost of the software. It was a matter of building an application around the software, which was very important. It was essential at that time for the government to act quickly and effectively. And that's what we did.
Honourable Member for North Island Powell River.
Madam Speaker, hospital emergency rooms in Port Hardy, Alert Bay, and Port McNeill have been closing repeatedly for the past few months because there isn't enough staff to keep them open. Residents of the North Island are extremely concerned that the emergency rooms are not there when they need them. Underfunding of healthcare by both Conservative and Liberal governments have left rural communities behind. Will this government provide significant, stable, and long-term funding for healthcare and address this crisis?
Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and we're obviously very focused and very mindful of these very severe difficulties that healthcare workers across the country, including in the members' riding, have been facing for a long time, and exacerbated obviously during COVID-19. That's why we're going to work together to continue to do that with increased funds.
May I interrupt the Honourable Minister? Do we want to listen to the answer for the Minister? The Minister is answering and trying to provide an answer to the question. If we keep being interrupted, I'll skip over the next question. The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm sure the member wants to hear the answer because she's very focused on the problems in her riding, and I congratulate her for that. And that's why over the last few weeks and months we've been investing increased resources through a $2 billion additional investment to reduce backlogs, another $1 billion to support healthcare workers in long-term care settings, and I could add more.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Strathcona.
Madam Speaker, people in Canada don't need more talk. This week, media reported that the emergency wait times at Edmonton Stollery Children's Hospital has reached 17 hours. Wow. One ER doctor revealed that patients are dying in the waiting room. It's unacceptable that the Liberals avoid taking any responsibility for this crisis. They are standing by while Conservative premiers are underfunding the healthcare system the Canadians need. And to make things worse, in Alberta, Daniel Smith is musing about scrapping public health care in our province. Wow. Canadians' lives are at risk. When is the government going to take action?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And all Canadians, and certainly Albertans, need and deserve the support of the federal government, including in supporting healthcare workers in Alberta and across Canada. We are obviously very mindful of the pressures and the intentions and sometimes the actions around privatizing our healthcare system. Canadians want to have access to the Canada public healthcare system in a manner which is supportive of the principles of accessibility, affordability, universality, and all of those principles that all Canadians, including Albertans, want us to support together.
Honourable Member for the Northwest Territories.
Madam Speaker, everyone in Canada should have access to safe, clean drinking water. Could the Minister of Indigenous Services Canada update this House on the recent progress?
The Honourable Member, can we let the member ask the question without commentary? The Honourable Member for Northwest Territories.
Madam Speaker, everyone in Canada should have access to safe, clean drinking water. Could the Minister of Indigenous Services Canada update this House on the recent progress that has been made in lifting long-term drinking water advisories in First Nations communities? Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Northwest Territories for his advocacy and hard work. Madam Speaker, just last week, Sashago Lake lifted their long-term boil water advisory, and this is a testament to their dedication and their hard work, and of course our commitment. Since 2015, 136 boil water advisories have been lifted. Madam Speaker, there are 31 more to go, each with its own project team and plan. And Madam Speaker, we will not rest till we lift those water advisories. This is important to all Canadians. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Sturgeon River Parkland.
Madam Speaker, the Minister of Emergency Preparedness repeatedly told this House that, quote, at no point did our government pressure or interfere in the operational decisions of the RCMP, including their communications strategy. Audio recordings of Commissioner Lucky state, quote, it was the request that I got from the minister's office, and I shared with the minister that it was going to be in the news release, and it wasn't. The minister directly interfered in an RCMP investigation for the purpose of advancing their political agenda. When will the minister resign for misleading Parliament?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, the members opposite can ask the same question as many different ways as possible. The answer remains the same, that in our democracy, one of the fundamental principles is that the government does not interfere in any police operation or police investigation.
The Honourable Member for Sturgeon River Parkland.
Madam Speaker, Commissioner Lucky told Parliament that, quote, she was not directed to publicly release information about weapons used to help advance pending gun control legislation. But we now have audio recordings where the Commissioner states, quote, does anyone know what's going on with the world of guns? They're trying to get legislation going. The Commissioner pressured her subordinates under direction from the Minister to advance the government's political agenda. In her own words, quote, she didn't come through for the Minister. The Commissioner misled Parliament. When will the government demand her resignation?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, I do want to again stress the fact that the Commissioner testified to parliamentarians at a committee in July where she said that I did not receive direction and I was not influenced by government officials regarding the public release of information. Speaker, she's stating exactly the practice, which is politicians do not interfere in police operation or police investigations. Our government abides by that really important principle, and at no time did the government interfere in a police investigation.
The Honourable Member for Langley Aldergrove.
Madam Speaker, the Prime Minister and the Costly Coalition with the NDP is making life more expensive for all Canadians. People in British Columbia are deeply concerned about the rapid rise in the cost of living and now about the cost of home heating fuels. Madam Speaker, the last thing Canadians need is more inflationary taxation at this time. Will the Liberal government cancel their plans to triple taxes on home heating this winter?
The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House.
Madam Speaker, the Leader of the official opposition, quote, said that countries that are running higher inflation than Canada are, quote, dumb. And that list includes the U.S., Italy, Germany, Sweden, Denmark, and the entire Eurozone. Look, right now, when we're in a time of global crisis, when people are finding things hard, it doesn't matter that Canada has one of the lowest inflation rates in the world. We have to do everything that we can to help Canadians. And that's why I asked the member opposite why they won't support dental care for families that need that support. Why won't they support help for those who are low income, who are renting? Why do they refuse to support it? Worse, Madam Speaker, why do they not even let it pass through the House?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Member for Elgin Middlesex, London.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. The government is making life more expensive for everyone. I've heard from seniors living on a fixed income who are struggling to put food on the table. I received an email from a constituent concerned that the prices at a local grocery store are skyrocketing, but the portions are being decreased. Winter is coming and homes need to be kept warm. Canadians are cash-strapped. Will the Liberal government give Canadians a break and cancel their triple taxes on home heating this winter?
The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House.
Madam Speaker, what I find most unfortunate, that in a time of global turmoil, when people across the world are facing the impacts of not only inflation, but of climate change, that the government, the government which is taking action faces an opposition in the Conservatives that is raising anxiety, that is trying to amplify people's anxiety instead of providing solutions. And what are their solutions? To take something that they know gives more money back than it takes to fight climate change, and then to stand up against dental care for those families that need it, to stand against support for low-income families that are renting. Madam Speaker, that is not responsible.
The Honourable Member for Repentigny. With the new pro-oil and gas policy Canada announced in Washington, things are shaping up for the Prime Minister to be named the oil patch's bestie once again. Yes, just like in March 2017 when the oil companies invited the Prime Minister to Texas to give him the prestigious Global Energy Leadership Award. Shell, BP, ExxonMobil, all the big oil companies were head over heels. This was their man. 5 years later, with Canada's new policy announcement in Washington, does the minister think his leader is way out in front to win the award again this year? The Honourable Minister of the Environment. Madam Speaker, I'm pleased to announce to my colleague that the Prime Minister of Canada was named Man of the Year by the National Geographic magazine for all the work Canada is doing on protecting nature. This is not a random thing. If the UN turned towards us to organize the next UN conference on protecting biodiversity. It was supposed to happen in China, but when that was canceled, they turned to Canada because we're the ones doing the most to protect biodiversity and to fight climate change. The Honourable Member for Repentigny. So China and Canada, that makes for strange comparisons. Canada's announcement in Washington reminds us that Canada has not been praised abroad for its fight against climate change, but the Prime Minister did get an award from the oil patch. Equiterre and the Sierra Club have sued the Minister of the Environment for approving Bay du Nord. The Deputy Prime Minister told the whole world Canada was going to fast-track oil and gas projects, even at the risk of losing some political capital. With this government, should we believe what we see or what we hear? The Honourable Minister of the Environment. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'd like to remind my colleague that in the last year alone, $15 billion was invested in electric batteries and vehicles in many projects, and many of those in Quebec. And when there was a recent announcement that chose Canada for a wind project. We are making a green transition. We're investing hundreds of billions of dollars in the energy transition in Canada. Thank you.
Speaker, Canada is experiencing an affordability crisis where 60% of Canadians are struggling to put food on the table. 20% of Canadians are dependent on food banks. Food inflation recently hit a 40-year high at 11.4%. Bread is up 22%, cereal 17.9%, baked goods 14%. The cause of this inflation, Madam Speaker, hundreds of billions of dollars of reckless spending, most of which was not related to COVID. Madam Speaker, when will this Liberal government finally abandon its irresponsible policies of tax and spend and let Canadians have a full belly when they go to bed tonight?
Madam Speaker, what responsible is pretending that a global problem that we have to take seriously is a problem that just exists in Canada. They might as well promise that the wind will stop blowing at our coastal borders if they were in government. The reality is we face global challenges just like every other country, and that it doesn't matter that we have one of the lowest rates. We need to take action. We need to provide support. It doesn't matter that we've lifted 2.7 million people out of poverty in the last 5 years. We have to do more. It doesn't matter that we have done this House has adopted legislation to help those that are in need $500 with GST credit. Where are they on dental? Where are they on housing?
The Honourable Member for Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Madam Speaker, what does matter is the more this government spends, the more things cost. I would say that this government has spent like a drunken sailor, but quite frankly, that would bring intoxicated mariners into disrepute. After a wild bender of spending, this government has got up in a ditch and said, "We see the light of fiscal restraints." Madam Speaker, excuse my incredulity, but I'm sure that millions of Canadians share my skepticism. Will this government reassure Canadians and fully commit to the Leader of the Opposition's plan and legislate pay-as-you-go?
The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House.
Madam Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition, who called the U.S., Italy, Germany, Sweden, Denmark, and the entire Eurozone dumb because they have higher inflation rates than we do. What is the action that he was taking while these quote-unquote dumb governments were attempting to deal with global inflation? He was recommending that people invest in Bitcoin, that they take their precious savings and they invest in Bitcoin. Madam Speaker, those people would have lost absolutely everything. Now, I'm quite sure that international leaders have more tact and dignity to share their opinions about the Leader of the official opposition.
The Honourable Member for Lambton-Kent Middlesex.
Speaker, the Prime Minister and his costly coalition with the NDP is making life more expensive for Canadians. Media reports that Canadians who pay for natural gas or electricity can expect their bills to go up by 50, 100, even 300% this winter. Now, I don't know about you, but everybody I know uses electricity and they need to heat their family home. Let me be clear, warmth during a Canadian winter is not a luxury. Will the government cancel their plans to triple taxes on home heating?
The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House.
Just like the Conservatives, Madam Speaker, believe that inflation is something that can just stop at the Canadian borders and we won't be affected by it, they also believe that climate change, and they're saying that we caused it, right? I mean, this is how ridiculous and preposterous their positions are. This is also their position on climate change. They want to pretend that climate change isn't going to cost tens and hundreds of billions of dollars. In fact, over the next 100 years, perhaps trillions of dollars. We just watched what happened in Atlantic Canada. We just watched what happened in Fiona. We need to take responsible leadership to protect this planet and at the same time make sure life is more affordable for Canadians, and that's exactly what we're doing.
Honourable Member for Saint Laurent.
Madam Speaker, it's Small Business Week. A chance to celebrate the contributions of Canadian small businesses as pillars of our economy and our communities. To help them thrive, we need to reduce the burden of regulations that are no longer necessary. Can the President of the Treasury Board provide an update on Bill S6 and how it will help Canadian businesses? The Honourable President of the Treasury Board. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank my honourable colleague from Saint Laurent for her question and her advocacy in her community. Madam Speaker, the annual bills to modernize regulations are a key part of our work to improve the efficiency, especially when it comes to climate change, health and safety, and seniors. Bill S6 makes 40 changes to reduce the red tape and burden on companies and simplify regulatory processes. I hope all parties in the House will contribute to facilitating the task. The Honourable Member for Beauce. Madam Speaker, food banks can no longer meet the demand in my riding and all across Canada. Mr. Boutin from La Source in Beauce confirms that the demand is skyrocketing and winter isn't even here yet. The impact of inflation is already being felt, especially for young families and seniors, with high grocery prices and rising interest rates. A recession is on our doorstep. Madam Speaker, we want a real answer. When is this government going to suspend all new taxes? Enough's enough. The Honourable Minister. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to reassure my colleague the federal price on pollution does not apply in Quebec because Quebec has its own cap-and-trade system. It works totally differently from the carbon tax. Quebec's emissions are going down thanks to the cap, not because of the tax. So there will be no increase in Quebec. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
For Charleswood, St. James, Assiniboia, Headingley.
Madam Speaker, this government ballooned our debt by over $100 billion even before COVID, then by $500 billion during COVID, of which $200 billion had absolutely zero to do with the pandemic. But now the finance minister has seen the light taken the advice of our leader and has brought in a pay-as-you-go policy. Canadians know they can't trust this finance minister and this costly coalition with the NDP when it comes to fiscal responsibility. Isn't that right, Madam Speaker?
The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House.
Madam Speaker, the Finance Minister has been seeing the light all through this crisis while the Leader of the Opposition was in the darkest corners of the internet searching for solutions on Bitcoin and recommending such things. We've actually been driving economic growth. In fact, it doesn't, I think that I would point out that it was 3.3% growth in the second quarter for Canada. France was 2.2, Germany 0.6, UK 0.9, US was actually negative 0.6. I would also point out, Madam Speaker, that we have seen a growth of 400,000 jobs since the lowest point, or since where we were before the pandemic began, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Last week, the PS to the Minister for Public Safety said the following respecting the placement of defibrillators in RCMP vehicles, which would save 300 lives per year, and I quote, "If the Honourable Member had a private company that wanted to donate AEDs to all RCMP vehicles, I would be happy to work with them on that," end quote. My question, in the event that one or more outside parties agrees to pay the necessary $10 million, will the government finally place AEDs in all RCMP cruisers, as I've been asking them to do for the past 6 years?
The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House.
As a former executive director of the Heart and Stroke Foundation, I could not agree more with the thrust and the intent of the member's question, which is AED save lives. I would encourage everybody to get trained in CPR and make sure they know how to use AEDs. The government continues to look at how we can support public health efforts across the country to make sure that that knowledge about defibrillators, knowledge about CPR and AEDs, and that as the government has supported the placement of AEDs, can look for ways to do so in the future, and I thank the member for his question.
The Honourable Member for Avalon.
Madam Speaker, our government has been there for Atlantic Canadians every step of the way as we recover from hurricane devastation of Hurricane Fiona. Small craft harbours are the lifeblood of the economy for communities across Atlantic Canada. Can the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans share with the House how our government will continue to be there for fish harvesters and Atlantic Canadians?
Sure.
Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member from Avalon for his question and for his leadership and hard work. I've had the chance to see the damage from Fiona's destructive powers firsthand, and I heard just how critical our small craft harbors are for people and their communities and economies. So that's why I announced $100 million of federal support for immediate work to clean up harbors and to recover lost fishing gear. Mr. Speaker, DFO officials are working hard to make sure that harbors are operational when fishing seasons begin, and we will not stop until the job is done.
Member for Edmonton, Griesbach.
Madam Speaker, I hosted a housing town hall in my community of Edmonton-Griesbach last week, and my constituents told me that big real estate companies are buying up their homes, treating the housing market like a stock market, all while evicting regular working Canadians. This Liberal government has done nothing to close the tax loopholes these investors have saved a combined $1.5 billion of money from taxpayers in my community. Edmontonians are losing their homes. On the other hand, we have Conservatives who continue to buddy up with big corporations with no end in sight. When will this government act to stop rent evictions and
the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We know that speculative investments in real estate are contributing to pushing housing prices higher. That's why we've legislated an annual 1% tax on the value of non-resident, non-Canadian-owned residential real estate and a 2-year ban on foreign investments in Canadian residential properties. We've also committed to reviewing the tax treatment of real estate investment trusts. We are committed to making housing affordable by doing our part to tackle the financialization of housing. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Spadina, Fort York.
Madam Speaker, a report by economist Ross McKittrick has exposed the true cost of the government's clean fuel standard. This second carbon tax will increase per household energy costs up to 6.5% a year. That's an extra tax of $1,277 annually. With food inflation at 11.4% and families struggling to afford basic necessities, the government is going to make things worse, a lot worse. Madam Speaker, the government says this tax will reduce Canada's carbon intensity footprint. Will they admit it will be minimal at best and achieved on the backs of Canadians working in the bleak economy predicted by the Finance Minister?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In the last 3 years, we've had the most costly forest fires in the history of Canada, the most costly floodings in the history of Canada, and now the most costly tropical storm in the history of Canada. Climate change is costing Canadians billions of dollars, and this is just a beginning unless we act. And unfortunately, the Conservative Party have no plan whatsoever. In fact, they want to make pollution free and they want to pay polluters to pay even more. Not on this side of the House, Madam Speaker. We will work to fight climate change and we will work to support Canadians. Thank you.
That is all the time for oral questions.